It will be in 5 parts, starting in Africa and ending with the history of the American Negro. Sometimes he described it as a multi-movement instrumental work, sometimes as an opera. But either way, he made it sound as if the ink were wet on the page, and his serpentine way with words never failed to hypnotize even the most suspicious of interviewers into assuming that the curtain was about to go up. In 1933, Hannon Swaffer, an English columnist, published an interview in which Ellington spoke of the unwritten work so evocatively that you could all but hear it playing in the background. I'm expressing in sound the old days in the jungle, the cruel journey across the sea, and the despair of the landing, and then the days of slavery. I trace the growth of a new spiritual quality, and then the days in Harlem and the cities of the United States. Then I try to go forward 1,000 years. I seek to express the future when, emancipated and transformed, the Negro takes his place, a free being, among the peoples of the world. Swaffer was no friend of jazz, or of blacks. He had once compared Louis Armstrong to a gorilla, but he bought Ellington's story hook, line, and sinker. All this was said with a quietness of dignity, he assured his readers. I heard almost a whisper of prophecy. Many more journalists would prove as willing to take Ellington at his oft-repeated word. That same year, Fortune told its readers that he was writing a suite in 5 parts. With this suite in his repertoire, Ellington may someday make his Carnegie Hall debut. In 1938, Downbeat reported that he had finished work on a full-length opera about the history of the American Negro. The truth was less impressive. Not only had he written none of his African suite, but he completed only 3 extended works of any kind prior to 1943, and the longest of them, Reminiscing in Tempo, ran for just 12 minutes, the length of the first movement of a symphony. Constant Lambert, the most perceptive of all the classically trained music critics to write about Ellington in the 30s, praised him as the first jazz composer of distinction, and compared him to Ravel and Stravinsky. But he also acknowledged that Ellington was a petit maître, whose best works were written in what may be called 10-inch record form. Into this 3.5 minutes he compresses the utmost, but beyond its limits, he is inclined to fumble. Even if his African suite was anything more than a fantasy, how could a petit maître manage to pull such a work out of his hat? Instead, he kept on carving one 3.5-minute cameo after another, and the only sign that he wanted to do something grander was his insistence on telling credulous reporters that he had either done so or was about to. That was Ellington's way. He talked not to explain himself, but to conceal himself. Even Ruth, his adoring younger sister, said that he definitely wasn't direct. He wasn't direct with anybody about anything. Yet he talked so fluently and impressively that nearly everyone believed him, save for those who had reason to know better. In one of his most frequently cited verbal arabesques, he claimed that Harlem Airshaft, which he recorded in 1940, was a musical depiction of the sounds of black apartment life. You hear fights, you smell dinner. You hear people making love. You hear intimate gossip floating down. You hear the radio. An air shaft is one great big loudspeaker. It's a splendidly quotable tale, so much so that one hates to point out that the composition known as Harlem Airshaft started life as Once Over Likely, a title that has nothing to do with life in a Harlem apartment house. Ellington talked with similarly seductive fluency when luring women into bed, drawing on an endless supply of the come-on lines that a friend of his dubbed crotch warmers, most of which appear on paper to be eye-rollingly florid. I knew you were here because the whole studio was suddenly aglow with a turquoise radiance, but which carried the force of iron conviction when spoken with his fine-grained bass baritone voice. Ellington